Welcome to the Omnigamersclub podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including sebo.
You want to play some
I am
sebo?
Daniel Winter. More on the noble game of sebo later.
Yeah.
How are you, Mark?
Yes, and I'm Mark Uasa. That's right. We are doing our main segment today. We're talking about a certain game. You want to tell us what that game is, Daniel?
Yes, that is Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn. And I have to check that sort of subtitle every time because I can never remember what it is. Games have too many subtitles. But this is a new game. Just came out last month on July 18th, 2024, developed by A44 Games, published by Kepler Interactive.
That's right. And we played it on Xbox Game Pass, but I believe it's on, the modern systems. It's on Windows, PlayStation, and Xbox Series. Like you said, it just came out recently, and let's talk about it.
Yeah. So where should we start here? So I talked about this a little bit previously. I believe when it was on the Steam Next Fest, there was a demo, and it left quite a good impression on me there. And I've been playing. I think I may have discussed it another time since then. Before my vacation, I'd sort of started picking at it. But we've finally both gone in now and jumped around and triple jumped and whatnot. So, shall we describe this game?
Yeah, for sure. I just finished this last night, although I've been playing it for a few weeks now, I feel like, on and off. And this game is, I think it's definitely a third-person action game. It's, you might call a Souls-light. It has that sort of, you collect some XP, but you can lose it if you get killed sort of thing, and you got to go collect your XP before you die again. It's definitely got that. And it's set in this sort of fantastical world, but it has some kind of real world influence. It has this sort of World War I kind of trench warfare kind of setting, but in a fantastical world with I think it's the studio, if I'm not mistaken, is based out of New Zealand.
Yes.
And they have some cultural influences. Definitely, I heard interviews with them that they have like the some wildlife and some flora and fauna from local landscape in New Zealand is featured strongly, and I would imagine that some history and First Nations culture from New Zealand is also represented in good measure.
Certainly
as well.
Some accents.
There's a ton of accents all around. Want to play some sebo? That's right.
So yeah, I didn't see a lot of that. To be honest, I've not been to New Zealand, so I can't speak specifically. I mean, from Australia, there's definitely some adjacents in the cultures there, but I didn't see I didn't see any specific references other than like as the giant birds. I guess supposed to be like mowers or something. Sorry, my cat is very much in a mood tonight. He will be joining us for most of this podcast, most likely, in video and or audio.
He's our third co-host, right?
Let's talk a little bit more about the setting, I think, as a launching point and who we are. So you're playing as Nor Vanek, who's a sapper in this sort of gunpowder punk world, sort of Napoleonic fantasy. You're in the trenches. It starts out with this very in media res description of the dead have attacked. I don't know how long the dead have been attacking for, where they came from, where how normal are zombies and other monsters in this world, but they're attacking, and you're basically in the trenches fighting these zombies with these muskets and trench warfare. And yeah, I guess it starts. You're trying to blow up the door that the zombies are coming out of, and somehow that backfires. That you shoot the wrong portal, and suddenly things are worse now in some inexplicable way that's not really described. The gods are loosed upon the world now, and you basically befriend one of these gods called Enki, who claims to want to help you put the cap back on Pandora's box, as it were, and kill the gods, basically, for reasons. I don't know. Gods are bad.
Yeah, and this little guy, who is a little guy, he's like I don't
Mm.
know, house cat size, but he's a kind of amorphous, kind of fox, dog, cat creature with bird
Feathered
feathers,
fox.
right? It's got this really kind of midnight blue, black kind of color palette to it, and it's a very cutesy character. And you think,
Mm.
coming from some more, I guess, like anime inspired stuff, you think it's going to be some sort of cutesy character with a high squeaky voice, but no, the voice sounds quite prim and proper, and he sounds
Quite
like
somber.
quite somber and low, and he basically sounds like Niles Crane from the Frasier TV show, and that was quite a juxtaposition. It's kind of a bit of a dour character, but I
Hmm.
like the back and forth between Nor and Enki. They're quite the odd couple, and
Yeah.
they're kind of like oil and water at the beginning, and I think that's intentional. And lo
Mm.
and behold, spoiler alert, they become pals over the course of their long adventure. And I like how their characters interact. A little bit more about Nor. She's kind of, you might expect, the stereotypical, like, no nonsense, tough as nail,
Stoic.
tough as nails kind of soldier that survives anything. And she definitely is that. But I like how she also feels like she's very empathetic. She's empathetic to the side
Mm.
characters that show up. In this game, you're seeing a lot of like soldiers that have their bits blown off, and a lot of like really demoralized troops, and everyone thinks that you're dead and you're the last survivor, and you come in and you sort of rally and bring their spirits up. And she kind of talks, she brings kind of truth to power sort of thing, and talks to whatever leadership that's sort of screwed up, talks bold faced to the gods and say you're done, you got to figure your stuff out. And but she's also quite sensitive and sympathetic and empathetic with her friends, her allies that she develops over time, not the least of
What?
which is this gruff guy, kind of looks like John Locke from Lost.
He's very grizzled.
Yeah, is the very daddy kind of daddy figure, Baz, peg leg Baz, who plays the little jazz guitar every scene that you see him in. And of course Enki, who forms a really buddy cop kind of bond.
Yeah, Nora really is a bit of an acerbic character, and it feels like most people don't really like her very much, even her friends. And so there's some interesting tension there, and like she's trying to help, but like the things she does, she doesn't earn much in way of thanks. Doing what needs to be done, right, in the trenches. But if one thing is, it's very cool. You have a woman of color as your protagonist, which I'm sure earned this game no shortage of Reddit complaints.
Right, of course. People complain just because there is a woman, and oh no, she has some pigment to her skin. I do have a bit of a complaint about this game, though, is that
Mm.
you have some, pretty noticeable armor that you wear over the course of the game. One of the pieces is, I think it's like pauldrons, armor, and then helmet. And then
Yeah,
most
that's
of
all
the
right.
time, you really need this equipment because it gives you these bonuses. And if you're wearing the helmet, you basically don't ever get to see this woman of color's face through 75% of the game, because she's wearing this like very heavy duty helmet. So, I mean, kudos, but that was a missed opportunity. I didn't see if there was an option where you can turn helmets off like you can in some other kind of more MMO games have
Maybe.
that, right?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, other than that, though, it is a quite diverse cast, which I enjoyed. Various people of color. I didn't really get a sense of the actual world and the setting, though. There wasn't a strong, because like you basically start in media res where everything is destroyed, and most of the towns you come across are under the influence of these
Right.
gods.
Yeah.
And basically being like hypnotized into fighting against you. You get very little sense of the culture of this world.
Right. It seems like you get the sense that, oh, everything's screwed up, but you have to kind of know what the default was to begin with.
The thing to compare the chaos to,
Right.
especially when it's a fantasy world.
Right.
Had it just been in the real world, then you'd have that point of reference,
Yeah.
right?
You mentioned that, the main force that you're fighting is the dead, but you also fight against this human faction, and you don't really know who they are or what they represent or why you're even
Mm.
fighting them. I imagine this has something to do with, like, you know, World War One or maybe even the Napoleonic Wars, just like I'm a soldier. That's what I'm good at. This sort of like apocalypse happened during a war, and that's just like the backdrop. But they didn't explain it very well, and I feel like as a result, I didn't really care about what most of the characters did, except for Nor and her immediate companions,
Mm.
and the ones with more screen time. Obviously, you came to care for more.
Because your only motivation is I want to kill the gods, but like how known are the gods in this world? Is like they've only just escaped. So how, do these are these gods of specific things? Like there's very little identity of how these gods are relating to the world, and to frame your motivation and why you're trying to kill them so badly, right?
Yeah, you have a little bit of a sense of, I guess, the world in terms of the design of the world. For
Mm,
instance, one thing I liked about this game compared to some other roguelikes, Souls likes that I've played recently is it's not very grimdark. It's actually pretty
mm.
lush. Like this looks like an attractive, for the most part, world. It's got its greens, its yellows, it's got a lot of browns. No lie, a lot of grays and browns. But and then there's the typical smattering of purple, which is the color of magic, right? So
And all the skulls, so many skulls and portals around.
yeah,
Just
you have
something
a very
haphazardly.
naturalistic landscape, which is quite lush and beautiful. And I imagine,
Mm.
of what little I know of New Zealand, that's what New Zealand looks like. It looks like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but it's got these like really harsh, large kind of striations or shards of like crystal formations
Mm.
throughout most of the levels and popping up here and there. And you obviously know this is not supposed to be there.
Well, here's the thing. Like, is this normal? Is it supposed to be here?
There's
Yeah, but
there's like
it's
floating islands and things like that.
Hmm.
Like I don't think those
Yeah,
are
there's some
natural.
there's some cool details and really cool design. Like there's the level design and navigating all these spaces. I just didn't get a cohesive sense of how they all fit together. And
Yeah, I did like how they did the level design is quite vertical. It makes use of vertical
mm,
space. There's some sections where you have this ability. It's actually a lot like that ability in Jedi Survivor or Jedi Outcast,
yes,
where you see a
mm.
point in the distance and you can kind of zoom in there automatically just by pressing a button. And I'm of mixed feelings about this because it looks cool, it feels cool early on, and as a result you get to see a lot of the beautiful world around you. This version, unlike Jedi Survivor or Outcasts, I think you could actually literally pause mid warp to each of the node points
Huh. Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
freely look around, which is kind of, it did have a mechanical use. It wasn't just for sightseeing. You could actually turn around and get a sense of like, where do I actually go from this point? Because you didn't always have a next destination point after you reach that. I guess the Y space. I call it the Y space because you see the letter Y when you play with the Xbox controller up in space. So you just warp up to that point, and then probably you're going to see another Y space in the distance and another Y space in the distance, and you can warp and fly up of these. Essentially, they're shortcuts.
I was gonna say, yeah. So there's basically these shortcuts you can unlock. You find this skull plinth again. It feels very out of place. You activate, and then it will unlock this chain of purple portals that you can fly between, and you just basically just dash through the air, and which feels like really thrilling. Just like flying and shooting around. You don't often like you're only really going to be using them though if you're backtracking. If you're exploring, because these are semi-open world spaces. There's two big zones that you're largely working through in a linear way with them offshoots here and there, and so there is a little bit of backtracking, but largely you're pushing forward most of the time, and so there's not really a lot of reason to be going back to even use these in the first place. It's not really a big recursive loop like Dark Souls, like the other Souls games, in which unlocking those shortcuts is this really thrilling moment of recontextualizing the world. Whereas this is just big floating portals up in the sky that you can jump around. And again, yeah, really cool. But I didn't feel like it utilized those in terms of the level design for backtracking in an interesting way.
Yeah, I wish they. I mostly agree with what you said. It is mostly useful for backtracking, and that's a little bit of disappointment because, well, what's the point of backtracking? I already made it here. You already give me fast travel for the most part across the major.
Mm.
They're pretty generous with their fast travel, actually. So the warp points just kind of help you get even faster in between those areas. They had rare occasions where they made those warp points part of the traversal challenge. Those
Mm.
parts I did enjoy, but they were too few and far between. And I wish that they had made them a little bit more like the Jedi Outcast, Jedi Survivor ones, where it was those warping was part of the platforming challenge.
Yeah, I think I kind of wish this game was more linear and just have that because when it has that sense of forward momentum, the game really is quite thrilling, right? Like going through the portals, the double jumping, the triple jumping, which we should talk about too. And when it has that forward momentum pushing you forward, it's really quite fun. But I didn't. It wasn't very. You so often just get bogged down in this semi-open world distractions, right? Rather than clear path forward and using that in an interesting level design. So yeah, very early in the game, they give you a triple jump basically through the Enki's somewhat ambiguous power. Basically, uses your gunpowder to like fling yourself into the air. You jump and throw gunpowder to sort of propel you upwards. You can do it once up and once sort of forward, which is basically a triple jump. And that was like immediately incredibly satisfying. I found that was one of the big draws of this game for me, especially in terms of the like. It was obviously very much influenced by Bloodborne and some of those other Souls likes, but those have very little sense of mobility and moving around the battlefield. So in that this feels so much like Jedi Survival was the one that comes to mind for me in terms of just it's just incredibly fun to just jump around and be moving around this space. And that was part of the reason why I did so many of the side objectives was it was an excuse to be jumping around these vertical spaces.
Yeah, I feel like the platforming felt good. It was actually maybe one of the
Mm.
best parts of the game is the platforming. Combat's actually pretty decent too, and a lot of the times, obviously, you use those together. I agree that the double triple jump is fun. The animation kind of looks dumb to begin with because literally you're just like shooting under your butt to make you jump higher, which
It's throwing dust beneath
I
you.
don't think that actually works in physics, and maybe it's a little bit magical, but it looks kind of stupid the first few times you do it.
It's sort of hand waved. It's Enki
Yeah, the
powers, I think.
50th time you do it, you're not even looking at the animation. You're just focusing on the traversal challenge, and that part of it is fun. And I thought that I wish this game was a little bit harder. It's pretty darn easy, and I think if anyone's listened to this podcast for a while, I think you know that I'm actually not really good video game player. I'm not strong at combat games. I'm not particularly good at platforming games, but I do like challenging games. And this game rarely was so challenging that I had to try things again and again. I think there were maybe like 5 things. I could count 5 areas where I had to repeatedly try again. And some of those were in like the optional challenges. Like there were optional
Yeah.
I like this is a really good thing. Like there were optional platforming challenges. There was optional mini bosses. And one thing I really liked was these optional like mob fights. Do you know the ones you're talking? Where you have to clear out like a big swath of enemies.
The sort of horde of enemies,
Right.
yeah.
And there were like usually an area has 2 or 3, maybe 4 enemies, and you can take your time, take them out in due course, and it's pretty much no sweat. You have about 4 or 5 bosses in the course of the game. Most of them were quite easy compared to some of the more tough games we've been playing, like Jedi Survivor, Outcast, or even like another Crab's Treasure. Those were highly mobile, combat heavy, Souls light games. But I felt like rarely were there a challenge here. And about once every area, you found a kind of mob-ish group. It was a particular challenge. It got called out as a challenge once you defeat all of the mob or the particular leader of that mob, of that
Like the big
horde.
cumulative health bar appears along the bottom for like the health bar of the entire
Yeah.
group.
And you also see the kind of the reward text like you got
Mm.
2,000 space bucks or 2,000 boomer points or whatever once you defeat that area. And it felt good, but mostly just the combat felt good. Like once you get skilled at this game, the combat becomes fluid, the abilities are fun, and the weapons are pretty fun, especially once you sort of power them up with upgrades.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that combat. I mean, just in terms of difficulty, I only had a couple of issues too. Like there was an early side boss that's basically, okay, just go level up a little bit more, come back, it's fine. The final boss I had a bit of trouble with. Let's just say there was multiple phases.
Mhm.
Trying to work through that was a bit tricky. But again, overall, wasn't a particularly difficult game. But yeah, in terms of the combat, so you have quite a few tools in your arsenal here. So you have your melee sword hitting enemies. You have your pistol, the nominal. That's the name of the game, Flintlock. You basically shoot as a counter or kind of like a parry. Basically, this is very much the Bloodborne influence here. You shoot the pistol at the last moment before an attack. You counter them, and then you can come in for a counter attack. Or you've also got like a regular block for regular attacks you can block. You've got Enki can basically. So this is quite explicitly influenced by Atreus from God of War as another sort of side character. There's a button you hit to basically have him attack. It's called a curse. It fills up a secondary bar above the enemy that you can use to stagger them. You've got like a secondary gun that you can use. Like it's a multiple effect. Is what is like a blunderbuss that there's like an area of effect, or there's
A rifle, like a sniper
a
rifle.
rifle for long range. So there's quite a few tools here that you're mixing and matching back and forth between here. And yeah, you really can get into a really cool rhythm and flow in this game. When it does work, there's a really excellent flow state, bouncing back and forth between different types of counters. That can be quite satisfying because like it's very very action driven. Like every time you do one of these counters, it goes to this sort of mini cutscene. That was always quite satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. This game has a lot of tools in your tool belt, and I like how you have a lot of variety in how you can tackle a boss, for instance. And really, it's only the bosses that you're challenged with because where you have to really concentrate and think about your loadout. Most of the times, it doesn't matter. You can get by with what you got because you can always get to one of those campfires to load up on your gear again. Typical Souls-like experience. You go back to campfire and you load up all your gear. And yes, the enemies come back, but this time around you kind of know what the makeup of that particular group or challenge is. So you bring the right weapons to bear. And a lot of the times you can snipe them from the distance, or you can lay down some grenades to lay some area of effect damage.
There's so many red barrels, red barrels everywhere.
Tons of explosive barrels,
and they will hurt you too. So to the point is, there's often too many of them.
Yeah, and they're really sort of. That's pretty cheesy and pretty typical, like a kind of like Red Dead revolver or something like that. But in this game, it kind of makes sense because it's literally called Flintlock, and you're called a sapper. So I want to ask you at this point, what was your upgrade tree? So there's kind of like 3 upgrade trees. I think the middle one has to do with curses, the right one has to do with like melee, and the left one has to do with shooty, I think.
Yes, yeah. So I just wanted to double back for a second in terms of those systems really work. They're really integrated into each other, and it encourages you to mix and match. In that, like that Flintlock counter, you only have so many charges, and to rebuild that, you have to you do like I think it's every 4 melee attacks rebuilds your gun counter. And using the Enki curse at the right, if you time that correctly, it can double up the sort of other meters. So there's several meters pushing and pulling at the same time that really encourages you to mix and match there. So in a sense, you don't really want to be doubling down on just one of those 3 trees. You want to be mixing it a little bit. And I was largely focused on the Flintlock, the gun tree. Partly just that counter was incredibly satisfying, kind of in a tricky way though, because there's a big issue I had with this game, I will say, is that there's those counters. So there's the regular enemies attack you regularly, you can block them with your regular shield. Then there's special attacks where the enemy gets a little red dot, And those you can only counter with the gun. You have to use one of your charges, shoot them with the gun. These are two different buttons, like one's left trigger, one's right trigger, right? Oftentimes these enemies, they'll start swinging, they'll come in for attack, they're telegraphing an attack, and then halfway through the attack, suddenly there's a red dot. And so you have to switch from one trigger to the other trigger, right? Which I found incredibly annoying to say, not knowing, because there's two very different parries that work for very different types of attacks, and trying to switch between those was just incredibly frustrating. Getting hit for another reason I'll get into later, breaks your counter, your basically hit counter. So one of the most key upgrades I found in this game was basically in the gun tree. There's an ability that makes your gun work for both as a regular blocking and a parry blocking. So you can basically always be gun countering. So you only have to focus on that one trigger rather than the two. And I think that got rid of a lot of my frustrations once I had that unlocked.
Nice. Yeah, I'll just say straight up that I went up for the curse upgrade track. So that's the one in the middle. And I think that's probably the recommended one because, let's be honest, like they're kind of like inverted triangles, inverted pyramids, and that the colors sort of blend together. So there's like three inverted triangles that overlap. And the curse one is in the center. So I think it's literally supposed to be the one that melds the two sides. Like they didn't put the guns and the melee combat touching each other. And I think that sort of did that for a reason. So
you can kind of splash out into the left and right sort of trees if you work way up into the middle, right?
You have to start from the bottom of all three pyramids, but you don't have to go straight up one. You can go up and over. But basically that means that I started out in strong and curse. I delved over into guns, and then I reached the top tier and I cut straight across the top tier of curse all the way back to melee.
Because Enki can be quite powerful too with those upgrades. Basically, it lets him tank various enemies and be auto attacking quite a lot. And he can one shot enemies pretty late in the game, I found, because like I said, you're hitting that Enki button and he's basically cursing them, which can it basically fills up a meter, which can poison them, do some sort of secondary effects. But once that meter fills, you can basically do a special attack, which will get rid of armor. So there's a lot of armored enemies. And it's either the only way to get rid of that armor is to parry them in a very specific way, or to build up that Enki curse, and that special attack will then also remove their armor. So again, another way in which the game is encouraging you to be using these multiple systems and not just spamming attack, right?
I really love that. I really love that balance. And I came to depend on and rely upon the curse abilities that Enki brought to you. And you're right, I loaded him up with the poison ability, because he has kind of like these three kind of like socketable gems essentially. And one of them is about making the armor weak of your opponents. One of them is about making the opponent's attacks weak, and one of them is about just poisoning them over time, or so overtime damage. And I mostly did poison because I could spam at a distance. I got the upgrades that let you build up the Enki points faster. And then I would just spam Enki from a distance. This is one of those games like Fallout 3 and onwards where you press a button and it auto targets the closest enemy.
Yeah.
And I kind of hate that, because basically
it was a little frustrating at times.
I was spamming that button every darn second of the game because it kind of acts like a sixth sense to detect enemies before you can even see them with your human eye as a player. And then I was spam, maybe shoot at a range with my sniper rifle, and then maybe toss a grenade. Their curse meters built up, shot with pistol, and that clears out most of them.
Yeah, I forgot like grenades are a thing too. So you really have a lot of tools here, but those upgrades, like switching out the crystals in your armor, it did feel like sometimes there was a little too many options for like the length and depth of this game. I didn't need to like be able to customize Enki in that sense, because like by the time you were even unlocking those, I could one shot so many of the enemies anyway, so there wasn't really much difficulty to warrant whether I'm doing poison damage or fire damage, right?
Yeah, I liked it. I liked the customization ability. Okay. I felt that it was not overly outlandish, but it was quite competently done, and it felt just about right, and it matched the game length, which was not too long either. I don't know how long I spent on the game, maybe about 20 hours or something like that.
15
15,
to
20?
20 hours if you're trying to do everything. You can probably mainline it in 10 to 12.
Yeah, and basically, a lot of that I rushed through the second half just to
Mm.
meet the deadline of this recording. But I basically 100%ed 95% of the first area, and I mostly blazed through stuff in the second area. I was kind of getting a little bit fatigued at that point, but there was constantly different things to see out in the world. For instance, there are wider areas. There are indoor caverns, which are kind of tight and claustrophobic. There's like tall vertical areas. There's even some of my favorite areas in the overworld map were the urban areas. So there's a couple of cases where there's an urban area, like there's a castle area that you sort of try and castle town and then castle that you try and breach in the first area. And then there's a proper kind of town in the second area. And those were some of the most fun areas for me because you got to do a little bit of more traversal. You got to run along the rooftops or down through the alleyways, and
It was very dense. I got lost in those rooftops quite a bit.
Yeah, but I kind of like that. Maybe it's all the Ubisoft games I've been playing
Assassin's
recently,
Creed.
like the Assassin's Creed, and
Mm.
that I just enjoy kind of climbing along the rooftops. But that's sort of my play style is,
Especially when you can triple jump, right? It's so easy to jump around on the
yeah,
roofs.
and take pot shots and kind of like make the enemies
Mm.
drive them crazy from a distance, duck around a corner and have them hunt you down. I just felt like this game was really fluid and fun.
Very arcadey, right? Compared to like those very stoic, static. The traditional Soul games are very slow and steady,
Yeah,
right?
it's not that. It's not the sword and board plotting, like you gotta time your parry just right. You do have to time your parry, but it sounds like you did that. You focused on parries a lot. I did a lot of dodge. I did a lot of dodge,
Mm.
debuff, shoot from a distance, and kind of wear down your opponent over time thing. And
Interesting.
it goes to show that this game can handle different play styles, and
Mm.
I think that's where the customization comes in. It's very decently robust for a game of this size, and I was
And
impressed.
yeah, and speaking further to customization, the armor is largely not numbers based. It's like each of the armor slots basically gives you a different ability. Like adds to the number of slots for your gun, or means that whenever Enki attacks does it attack several times in a row, he basically causes a mini explosion, and so you can use that to further customize your build. My one other pet peeve though is that there is upgrade trees. So you're collecting these souls, for lack of a better term. I don't know what they call it in the game, but you can use that to buy new abilities in the tree. You can use that to upgrade your armor. Or you can use it to buy cosmetics in the taverns. There's these cosmetics you can buy, but that's all coming out of that one
One
currency,
currency, yeah.
right? And like I didn't max out any of the trees. I think I maxed out like one of the three. So if you're trying to do that and upgrade your equipment, you're very quickly like you're really disincentivized from really focusing on one of those. Like you don't want to buy cosmetics because it's like you need that for upgrades, right? So I think they could have used find other ways, because you're also collecting like wood and ore and all these other secondary materials, and I have so many of those by the end of the game because the real bottleneck was that main currency.
Yeah, I agree. It's your XP, for a lack of better word, and you're right. I didn't spend any money at all into cosmetics once I realized that
Mm.
all of those upgrades were available to me, and I guess that's fine. People that like dress up and like cosmetics can invest in those if they want to.
You can change the color, what color pants. They're not like particularly exciting cosmetics.
Yeah, and the armor is probably the most substantial change to what your
Mm.
appearance is going to look like. Basically, you got the pauldrons, the armor, and the helmet, like I said. And like a lot of games out there, maybe your action RPG style, like Diablo, say, if you have armor of a similar set, you actually get a set bonus. So that was fun for me. It was like a motivation to seek out and upgrade ones that made sense to my playstyle, and I ended up building up the sapper, which was the one that built the black powder, to let you shoot
But see,
more.
if I think that's a good opportunity to talk about one of the other unique features here, though, is like Souls sort of multiplier, I guess you'd
Oh
call
yeah,
it.
yep, yep.
So this game does have that traditional Souls trope. You die, you drop your souls in the ground. If you die a second time before you collect them, you lose them all. That is here, but I mean, I wasn't dying very often. That is, there is. I don't know. To be honest, I don't even know where they left that in here. I think they could have excised that completely because the focus here is instead they move that sort of tension point of punishing the player to this bonus system whereby each time you attack an enemy, especially if you're using multiple different types of attacks, you're building up this score multiplier that you're basically going into a bank of those souls. So you've killed a couple of monsters, you've built up a 50% multiplier, you've now got 500 souls in that bank. So I could cash those in right now, add them to my pool of souls. Or I could keep fighting and try and build it up more. And if you get hit once, you lose everything. Or you don't lose everything, you lose the multiplier. You still get the base level of souls, but you lose the multiplier. So there's a really interesting push your luck system there. Rather than the punishment of death, it's moving that friction point to a push your luck. How far do you want to try and to get some bonus souls? The issue is I don't think that system is explained very well. I'm not explaining it very well. It took me half the game to figure out how this was even functioning. Like, am I losing all of my souls, or was I losing just the bonus? When should I be cashing this in? That wasn't very clear.
Yeah, I understood that system pretty readily because it
Okay.
spoke to me as maybe it has to do something with my age. Like basically, it's a Tony Hawk Pro Skater and or Crazy
Mm.
Taxi bonus meter, right? So it incentivizes and rewards you for doing runs, for uninterrupted sequences of basically coolness. So if you can pull off a sequence of moves, even gives you a bonus point multiplier for like sliding on terrain,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
really has
yeah.
nothing to
It
do
feels a
with
little bit like
combat.
Devil May Cry, which gives you like an S rating at the end of the game, or at the end of each level for like how much variety you use for your abilities, right?
Yeah, and it adds like a small degree of tension, but it's going to be up to each
Mm.
player to determine how much it affects you.
It's not about punishing; it's about bonuses.
I for one didn't feel too beholden to it. There's actually an option to manually press like the left button on the D-pad, and you can just basically cash in your bonus right away. You can say, "I'm out,"
Mm.
which is
Yeah,
really
exactly.
smart because maybe they felt that some playtesters were finding that it was too stressful to try
Mm.
and keep that multiplier up. So if you feel like you're going up into a tough area or you might die, you can just say basically bank it. And if you do get killed, you still have to collect it, but that multiplier, I guess, would be saved up to that point, or that's how I understood it.
Yeah, again, I think it was a really cool system, and again, in moving that friction point away from punishing. My problem once again, though, was that the enemy telegraphing I feel was really badly tuned in terms of not having enough warning to when they're going to suddenly switch from one type of attack to another, and so I regularly got hit when it feels like I wasn't expecting it. So I think there's a couple of the systems clashing there. All I needed was a little more tightening up, especially in those enemy telegraphs, to make it easier to anticipate what you're going to experience with these enemies.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of area with this game, and I think that we've been mostly positive about it. And I think that's truly my feeling about this game is that I'm mostly positive about it. But it also feels like very much like a, you know, B plus effort from
Hmm.
a relatively new or new to me studio. I'm not sure what their previous works are, but it's a pretty exceptionally competent outing for a young studio. I think there's so many things that are solid about this game, and I think it would have really sung if it had a little bit, 10-20%, a little bit extra dev time, a little bit higher budgets to sort of really polish what's
Yeah,
there, because it's so good, it's so promising.
there is a lot of
There is
promise.
a lot
That's
of
the
promise
thing.
there, but none of it
But
really
yeah,
excels.
right. So many of this type of game, your God of War, your Bloodborne, the budgets have ballooned so much. There's so much focus on immersion and all these tiny little details that you really feel the lack of here. Like I was in a town, I see a stack of crates. I'm gonna smash those crates don't smash. What is this? Like you really like again, not to mean this as a derogatory sense. you really feel the constraints here, where their budget ran out, where they stopped filling in these little details. And I think in part that's a good thing. Like games have gotten so far out of hand in these ballooning budgets, right? So I don't think that that's the solution here. Is make everything smashable, destructible environments. Like I think the issue was more just some tuning elements. I think we need more of these games. That sort of more sustainable budget. I think, but this one at the same time doesn't feel incredibly memorable in terms of its setting and and the story. I think some of that doesn't entirely come together because you mentioned that the previous games was actually Ashen, a game that I think was incredibly memorable in terms of its art style. At least very low poly, cool setting, and I was thinking a lot about when we were playing Another Crab's Treasure. I was thinking a lot about Ashen and how much I really enjoyed that game, and it has an incredible like distinct style. With this looks like a AAA game. It's trying to emulate those games, but can't quite get there. And I think they really shot themselves in the foot by trying to emulate that. They should have just done their own thing and like made a more unique style.
Yeah, I'm also having a hard time expressing how I feel because I kind of agree with you. I wish more games were like this. I kind of
Mm.
wish that fewer games weren't these kind of bloated, hyper polished monstrosities like your EAs or your Ubisoft games, where they had a whole like 20-person Persian rug team where they made sure that all the stitching on the Persian rugs and in Assassin's Creed were just right. Like, I don't really care about that. I want the effort to go where it matters most.
Mm.
Polish is, I'm perfectly fine without it. This game really shines on so many levels. It's a real exemplifier of a double A game. And I kind
Yeah.
of love double A games. I think they're great. They have the most personality. And I feel like this game is risking a lot because it's trying to ape a AAA game, right?
Exactly, yeah. And there's been
And
so many of these lately, like your Forspoken and like Immortals of Avium that I can never, I can't tell those games apart because they're all these double A, like big. They look big budget in terms of the graphics, but that fidelity makes them all look the same.
right, and because they're trying to ape those AAA games and reach those AAA markets, they end
Mm.
up shooting themselves in the foot because they kind of saw the rough edges off of their plots, their designs, and I don't think this game entirely falls for that, but
Mm.
there is a lot of sort of samey stuff here, despite all the great stuff in this game.
Yeah.
For instance, we've said a lot of nice things about the game, but most of the enemies are super forgettable. Most of the
Mm.
cast is super forgettable. Most of the backgrounds are really forgettable. So mechanically, it's great. I think the boss
Mm.
fights are fun. Those are
Hmm.
pretty memorable. And the regular moment to moment gameplay is solid, but it rarely jumps to a point where it's absolutely knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, it was quite a few small frustration points that, like, a lot of which all came down from those weird enemy telegraphs that I just struggled with for some reason. Partly because I just started to get in there and spam attacks, right? So that's partly on me. But I think tightening that up would have just made it all feel so much better. And like, what is there already feels really good. Like once I just made sure I could counter with my gun constantly, I got in this really cool flow state. Like even in bosses, there were various boss fights where I could basically permanently stun lock them, and that still felt good. Like even though if there wasn't a challenge, just the flow of block counter, Enki, block count, like that felt good, right? There is a really cool flow.
Yeah, you're right. This sort of reminds me, I mean, I know we cover analog games just as often as we do video games in this channel, but this kind of reminds me of like an engine building game where you build up your engine and you get so acquainted with the mechanisms of play that you actually want it to end. You want it to end before you've
Yeah,
maxed everything out. Otherwise,
just running that engine over and over again
the
until it's
yeah,
just
the challenge is
redundant. Yeah.
gone. Like you want a game to
Mm.
reach to a point where it's still got that last 10-20% left over that you can't quite max everything else out, so that it is a challenge and you're not a superpowered god of a character. And I think this game does it fairly well. I was pretty done with the game after I beat the last boss.
Yeah.
I wasn't too compelled to go back and do the final bits and do all the side quests because they were pretty forgettable. And there were a couple of abilities I would have loved to unlock, but once you beat
Mm.
the last boss, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like they could have, if they'd focused more on a linear progression rather than these open worlds. Like it was fun to jump around, but had they incorporated more sort of jumping puzzles into like a linear path forward, that could have been a lot more satisfying rather than these sort of amorphous semi-open world spaces. But speaking of analog games, I do have one final question for you, Mark, and that is, what do you think of SIBO?
That game. So this game has a lot of characters sitting around the world. Some of them who are presumably hostages or being tortured in dungeons, and all they care about is playing this little disc
SIBO
jumping
pilled.
game called Sebo, and it's cute. It's cute. It is not so much like a card game like what is that Witcher
Went.
game or like Triple Triad or any of those
Mm.
games before it. It's really like a analog abstract game.
It feels like the GIPF projects games like Yinch and Devon, I think. Like those basically just discs on hex boards that you're moving them around like checkers, basically, right? Like two-player abstract
Right. Kind
strategy
of like
games.
imagine it's checkers, but instead of grids, it's triangular spaces.
Triangular,
It's
yeah.
a triangular grid. And unlike chess, or triominoes, or I don't even know how triominoes works, but it's the exterior shape of the board is not fixed. So you have these weird trapezoidal maps, you have these triangular maps,
Donut shapes.
you have these really odd shapes. Some of the maps have like well, empty space in the middle where you cannot traverse. And basically the goal of this game is to make a triangle with the pieces of your color. And like some of these abstract games before, there's an offensive and there's a defensive round. So first you have to be on offense against the opponent. You have to form a
Make a
triangle
triangle.
first. And then you have to, if you win that, you can proceed to the defense, and then you have to prevent them from forming a triangle of their own. I think
It's a cool idea.
yeah, it's a good idea.
But yeah, I bet in terms of splitting the attack and defense into separate stages, though, because you're only focusing on one thing at a time, it's very easy to get into stalemates, both for and against you, right? Like I've regularly found myself, well, I literally can't get into a position to win because the enemy has just like stalemated me, moving back and forth. Because you only have like say 10, it's variable, but let's say 10 turns in which to form this, or you lose. And so it feels like a puzzle rather than a strategy game, but they're not tight enough to really be a true puzzle.
Yeah, that's right. This didn't because we are board game players. But my board game playing mind was yelling at me. This would never be a product that could be sold on a market.
No. It has the depth of noughts and crosses, really, like a little bit beyond that, but it's not quite there. It's a cool idea,
yeah,
but very repetitive.
You're right. It's just a sequence of puzzles to take your mind away from the jumping, shooty routine. And I played at every opportunity I found. I played with every opponent that was there. I made sure to play until I beat every opponent there. But yeah, you're right. The matches were a little bit cheap. Like sometimes they just had an ability that was intended to block you.
I regularly just won because the enemy just made a mistake and moved where they shouldn't have, and like the AI was not very good either. So.
Yeah, and the special tiles that you earn over time by opening treasure chests or whatever felt like too powerful. Like they were cheap. They were too swingy. Like they weren't like a magic card, which is slightly better than another magic card. They're like a game that will destroy any opponent that you face just because you wielded it. And
mind you, if you use those coins though, you have less turns. If you add in the coin, you have less turns to try and win the game. So there is a little bit of push and pull there.
Yeah, I wonder if we could prototype this game in reality and see if it's actually
try
fun.
And save SIBO. I do feel like that all those people sitting around desperate to play SIBO were staff members because they all inexplicably had a New Zealand accent.
There you go. Yeah, I don't think it was a nice distraction, but I don't think they could publish SIBO.
No. There's no Gwent.
It's not going to hit the Board Game Geek new hotness. Let me tell you.
But it is fun to see them explore like one of these side games that isn't just a card game.
Totally. Any game that has a side mini game built into it, I'm 100% for, even if it's half baked.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground for Flintlock. What is it? Siege of the Dawn? Dawn is a location where you visit in the game.
Yeah, I guess that's the same with the city, right? Which, yeah, again, the story itself didn't entirely come together. There were twists and turns that largely come together by the end, but by then it's too late to have contextualized the journey.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I feel like they missed out there, unfortunately. But there is a lot of fun to be had in a very arcadey Souls-like game that isn't as punishing as that genre usually is.
Yeah, I've already given my my assessment, but I'll say it again. It's a B plus. Solid recommend. I wish more games were like this, made by indie studios with a lot of heart, a lot of soul, and I want more rough edges. I don't want the rough edges sanded down. This game looks great. It plays great. I just wish it brought more weirdness to it, and maybe make it a little bit less ambitious. The story was just kind of out there, didn't really pull together for me.
Yeah, more games need weird little guys that follow you around and talk to you for the game. So
very good. Okay, so there's Flintlock. Shall we talk about the next game we're going to be covering?
Yeah, speaking of card games, we're finally going to take the plunge and talk about Lorcana for our next featured game. So that is the Disney themed deck building game from Ravensburger.
Right, and I joined you for a launch event of this game, but I haven't played since. So you're going to have to bring me up to speed on the new sets and what the new meta is. And I don't know anything about Disney. I don't know anything about this game, so it'll be an interesting journey.
Yeah, well, availability was tricky. The cards were very expensive, hard to find for a while. Now that situation has stabilized, we're keen to jump in and see what magic is in Lorcana. So, if you have any questions or comments on Lorcana or Flintlock or any other games you have been playing, you can join the club and contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website, omnigamers.club.
That's right. And you can find our episodes on YouTube where we put them out about once a week. We're putting all of our episodes, our playlists, and our main segment episodes on YouTube. So go check us out there if you have not yet. And if you've found us through YouTube, then go check us out on a podcatcher of your choosing. We're on all of them now. Our feed failures have finally fixed themselves. So
have rebooted.
Hurrah. Well, that was great. We're going to keep on playing, and then we'll do a playlist episode next.
Excellent. Well, once again, thanks for listening. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Daniel. And until next time, want to play some sebo?